Friends, welcome. We will get underway. We've got a few more coming as usual. Uh, Most of us are Christians, so if you are visiting us, Christians are usually late to church. Just think about it like that. Well, speak of the devil. Friends, welcome along. Welcome to the Bean Candidate Forum. This is an initiative of the Freedom for Faith. It's organized by Southside Bible Church and hosted at Covenant Christian School. We are holding this not just for the benefit of our church, but we are holding it for the benefit of Christians in the Bean electorate. My name is Jayan Parry. I'm the senior pastor at Southside Bible Church, and it's my privilege tonight to serve you as your chair. Friends, it's just 2 more nights to go to the election. And we were joined by 4 of our candidates. I think the 4th one is still coming from the Greens. Tonight we are joined by our candidates for Bean. In case the last one doesn't arrive, we are joined by David Smith MP from Labour, David Lamerton from Liberal, Jessie Price Independent, and hopefully by Sam from the Greens. Would you first give them a warm welcome, please, to our midst? Tonight, we want this forum to reflect our shared values and communal life together as a community that live in this electorate. And I want to start off by thanking you candidates for taking the time tonight to come and speak to us. I know it's been a busy week for you, and it's still a busy couple more days to go. And thank you for the many volunteers from the school, from the other churches, especially the campaign teams that have helped make tonight possible. And I especially want to express my gratitude to our candidates tonight for having the courage to say, yes, I will take a stand. I will go into politics. It's not some small thing. They do a hard job. They do a difficult job and often a thankless job. And to be honest, there are few professions that are seen with more suspicion and doubt by public. Being a used car salesman, being a pastor, or being a politician. So let me say this up front from one bloke with a very misunderstood profession to another. Thank you for putting your hands up to serve us as our leaders in the future. Now, you might be wondering, why is a church hosting a political event, a political forum? There's 2 reasons for it. Number 1 reason is that God uses politics to enact His sovereign rule. Politics touches, the way God has ordained life, is that politics touches every part of our life, including our ability to love our neighbors and to speak the truth in love. God uses earthly leaders to accomplish His sovereign purposes, even when they don't realize it. Let me give you an example of this from the life of the Lord Jesus in the New Testament. Jesus, before His crucifixion, for the sins of the world, He stands before a Roman politician, Pontius Pilate. And He says to him, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world. See, Jesus makes this clear that His kingdom is not of this earth. But it doesn't mean that His kingdom is irrelevant. It just means that He's bringing in a kingdom which is far more eternally significant. Earthly kingdoms and politicians and people will come and go, but Christ reigns forever. And yet through the hands of people like Pilate, God brought about His redemptive purposes. What you are finding there in that incident is politics, earthly politics intersecting with God's eternal plan. So God wants Christians to take seriously our responsibility and opportunity to select our leaders. The second reason is that God wants us to care. The Bible tells us to pray for our political leaders, whether we vote for them or not. This is what the Apostle Paul writes to an early church in the 1st century in Ephesus. He says, first of all, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and for those in high positions, that we may lead peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. And God considers this is a good thing and is pleasing in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all people to be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. So at Southside Bible Church and churches throughout our electorate and city, Christians regularly pray for our leaders. Not because we expect them to be perfect, but because we want to be able to live quiet and dignified lives so that we can live in a manner that the people around us will come to know Christ. For there is one God and there is one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus. So yes, we vote, yes, we engage, we care about public policy, but more than anything, we pray that every person in the Bean electorate will have the opportunity to know the King who will reign forever. Talking about living quiet and peaceful and dignified lives, that's exactly what we want this tonight's forum to be. This is not a forum for a gotcha question to our politicians. This is a space for respectful listening, thoughtful questions, and gracious interaction. It's a chance for us to hear and for our politicians to hear our concerns, and most of all, as we've been told, to pray for our leaders and for our country. So having said all that, let me open with a word of prayer. So please join me if you don't mind. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you that you rule the universe in love and justice, and that you appoint human leaders to govern under you. Lord, we ask that you would help our candidates to lead with truth and integrity, that we might live quiet, godly, and dignified lives. And above all, Lord, we pray that every person in the Bean electorate would have the opportunity to know why Jesus matters and have the opportunity to come under the rule of your everlasting kingdom. And so, Lord, we pray that you will guide us tonight in truth and love as we consider the matters before us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Friends, the way this forum is going to work, there's going to be 3 segments to this. Now, we get the opportunity to ask our candidates using that Slido. I'll put it up later on. But before we do that, we just want to get to know you a little bit. We've only known you guys, for most of us, in 2 dimensions by the side of the road over the last week or so. So we want to know you in 3 dimensions tonight. So these are short questions, so you don't get a lot of time to think about this. So David Smith, dog or a cat? Do you prefer a dog? Are you a dog person or a cat person? Okay. David the Junior, Laminin? You called him elder. Dog or a cat?
I was always a dog person, but I door knocks 3,400 homes and I'm now a cat.
Okay, good answer. And Jesse? A dog. Quick answer. Now, Jesse, you're going to go first because you ended up. This is a strange question. I'm not asking you, singling you out. Brushing teeth before breakfast or after breakfast? You're a nurse. You should. Before and after. What about you, David? Brushing after. David? Definitely after. Well, there you go. All right. So last one. David Lamerton, league or AFL? League. Jessica? AFL. David? Okay. There's a new code coming up. All right. So friends, the way this format's going to work, we'll watch 3 or 4 rather pre-recorded video questions on 4 key topics. They concern freedom of religion for us as individuals and Christian institutions. And each candidate has already received these questions. They get about 3 minutes. Greens are not here, so we get an extra minute. So 3 minutes each to respond, and I'll be keeping to strict time, so we need to get through tonight. And after this segment is over, we'll have a short break. There's some coffee and refreshments at the back, and we'll go to audience questions on Slido. So I'll sit down, and this is the last time you should hear from me for a long time. So I'll click the video, and David Smith, you will go first in answering this question.
About what we believe in the privacy of our own homes. It's about the right to express those beliefs, to speak openly, to practice freely, and even to hold and express views that are unpopular. It also freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, including the freedom to worship, practice, and even teach our beliefs, whether in public or in private, by ourselves or as a group. It also says that every parent has the right to teach what they believe to their children and have them educated in their faith. Australia is a signatory to this international covenant, and it is legislated as one of the 7 core international human rights treaties that Australia has adopted. Despite this, we have no national laws that protect religious freedom. Instead, we rely on a patchwork of laws that usually mention religion as an afterthought and often as an exemption rather than as a positive right. Right now, religious freedom is under great pressure. Beliefs that have been consistently taught for thousands of years are starting to be defined as harmful or bigoted, and laws are being enacted that restrict these teachings in the name of inclusiveness and protecting people from harm. For example, proposals for vilification legislation have been drafted with a new subjective test where the mere expression of a religious belief could be punished if a person from a protected group might consider it harmful. In Victoria, laws have been made that make certain prayers illegal, and a government commission has a website listing what prayers are acceptable and what ones are not. Those laws could see parents punished for simply encouraging their child to follow religious teachings on gender and sexuality. Companies have followed the example of our governments, and people have lost their jobs or been punished at work for expressing their beliefs or even simply because of what church they went to. Trying to silence religious beliefs does not create a more inclusive society. Instead, it creates one that excludes people of faith. Australia needs a government that understands the importance of religious freedom and protects the rights for all people to respectfully debate and disagree on these most fundamental issues. Will you protect the individual rights of religious freedom, expression, and conscience, and the right for parents to raise and educate their children in accordance with their faith?
Who's the old person in the room? Look, straight up, I should say that one of my positions in Parliament is as the co-convener of the Christian Parliamentary Fellowship, a bipartisan group that's been around now since the late 1960s, and I can say confidently that I will advocate to protect that positive right of religious freedom. And the extension of that into our education system. Now, I know that obviously in terms of broader challenges across the Parliament, this has been one of the really fraught areas of debate. I was in the Parliament obviously during the Morrison government when legislation came before the Parliament and collapsed. I was there in a sitting session at 5:15 in the morning when everything just really fell apart when we tried to have some earlier conversations. And so I guess one thing that I'm committed to doing is to working across the aisles to try and get to a bipartisan position, because I think that is critical in ensuring that we can actually move forward in this important area of debate. And look, it's important to be aware that Labor has made a commitment that rights will not go backwards. So that we're not in the business of seeing rights further eroded. But my own personal position is that I'll fight for that positive expression of freedom of religion.
There's a light on that one. Yeah. The short answer is yes, I absolutely support freedom of religion. I think it's a fundamental value in Australia, and it's a real privilege to live in a country where we can all live alongside one another with the positive right to religious freedom, absolutely. Last night we were all at a forum at Trinity talking about the right of families to educate their children in schools that are of the Christian faith, and where Christianity is what's the word, embedded kind of through the whole curriculum, and that's a choice that families make and should be protected. And we were all committing to supporting funding for Christian schooling as well, in the same sense of supporting families' choice and recognising the value of the value in that education that families really want to have for their children. So.
I prefer to stand if it's okay, Jesse. Good evening, everyone. I'll always start with thanking the veterans, the servicemen, servicewomen, and all of the families of servicemen and women and veterans in the room that join us tonight. And there's a really good segue when it comes to servicemen, when we talk about the centurion that met Jesus, and he says that I'm a man under authority. So when it comes to answering this question, it's not really what I believe in my response to this. It's what are we commanded to do, and it's pretty simple. It's freedom of religion, and it's freedom of expression, and of course having the ability to teach your children what you feel is right in your own home. So there's just two quick anecdotes I want to say to that. And when it comes to these debates, it doesn't take us long to just look, east or west to the US or the UK to see where things could head, whether it's the assisted suicide legislation in Europe, or if there's same-sex marriage debate, or what things can look like down the track. All you've got to do is look at what happened with that veteran over in the UK that was fined for praying. And that's the sort of road that I feel that we're going down, and that's something that we cannot have. He was simply a veteran himself. He was praying in front of an abortion clinic, and they fined him on account of being within a buffer zone, and it was this buffer legislation that they used to get him on. So that's one thing that I want to say in terms of having that freedom to say and pray and have the faith that you want. But the other thing is that I'm a board member of Vision Church out in Fyshwick, and this issue came up a lot when the ACT tried to bring in legislation, or did, around conversion laws. And we brought in lawyers, and we spoke at length about what we're going to do to try to deal with that. And basically it came back to the pastor can more or less say what they want from the pulpit, but anybody else, any other volunteer, anybody in youth ministry, which is the most difficult of all, children's ministry, the soup kitchen, whatever it is, they all have to walk on eggshells, because if they put one word out of line, they are possibly in breach of these new laws. And to me, that's not how you work a church. It's not how you work any faith organisation. And if we go down that path, that's a very slippery slope. Thanks.
Freedom of religion doesn't just include individual religious belief and practice. It protects our ability to worship and live out our faith together as a group. This means religious communities must have the freedom to gather, worship, teach, and serve. This is part of freedom of association, the right to gather together with people who share the same beliefs as you. Part of this right is the ability to create institutions based on faith. Churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples, so people can gather and worship together. But faith isn't just about worship. We also need to build schools so we can educate our children in line with our faith, and charities so we can live out our faith by caring for others. Australia has a rich history of being blessed by faith-based institutions. Many of our largest charities, hospitals, shelters, aged care, and aid, were founded as expressions of faith and still operate today because of their faith identity. Equally, the very first schools in Australia were founded by the church, and today 1 in 3 parents choose to send their child to a faith-based school, and that number is growing. These institutions serve all Australians. regardless of background, but they fundamentally remain religious organisations, built on faith, guided by faith, and successful because of our faith. But all this has been put under threat by governments and legislation that are trying to force religious organisations to compromise on their beliefs or prevent them from running their institutions according to their convictions. One of the most serious areas of pressure is employment and appointment of volunteers. At both state and federal level, laws have been introduced or proposed that would prevent faith-based organisations from preferencing employees who share and live out that organisation's faith. Our institutions are about our people. To be a faith-based school or charity, we need people who not only say they believe our faith, but who live it out in everything they do. Faith-based charities are not just service providers. They're mission-driven organisations that serve others because of their faith. Schools and colleges don't just teach curriculum, they help to shape and form students' characters in a set of values and beliefs. And Australians are increasingly choosing to send their children to schools who form their students based on faith. And school staff, executives and teachers and support staff are the people who set that culture. Australia is greatly blessed by our faith-based institutions, educational, charities and places of worship. But none of this can happen unless they can choose to employ people who uphold and live out their faith. So, will you protect the right of faith-based organisations, including charities and educational institutions, to operate according to their faith? This includes employing staff and engaging volunteers who believe and practice their faith.
Sure, and I'll stand up so I can see everyone at the back as well. So last night, like I said before, we were at Trinity, and there was a really moving testimony from one of the teachers there who went to Trinity herself as a student. Her children are there now. She's taught in public schools, and she's just come to teach at Trinity after 7 years, I think it was, in the public school, and how moving it was for her to be able to practice her faith openly and share it with children at school. And it seems to me that teaching in a Christian school would be so attractive to Christian teachers, because that is that whole a way of being able to be fully in your faith in the school and in the whole curriculum and with the students. I totally understand schools wanting to employ Christian staff, and I guess there's a whole, what's not kind of explicitly in the question is the legal aspect that David was referring to earlier in Parliament. I've met with Ian Hewitt from Trinity to understand some more detail about the legal side of that in terms of the positive, I don't want to get the wording wrong, but the positive discrimination to employ Christian teachers. And I would like to understand it more. It's not my area of expertise. So I'm still learning, and, please let me know more that you'd like me to understand about the ins and outs of the legal side of that. But in principle, I understand the wish for that. I support Christian schools employing Christian teachers. The part I'm not sure about is the legal kind of implications of that positive discrimination, and that's what I'd like to understand more. Yeah.
Sure, thank you, Jane. So, as Jessie mentioned, we had the Christian Schools Australia Forum last night, so apologies for anybody that was there, and I'm repeating myself, but my wife went through Trinity many years ago and graduated in 2008, and she described a school where everybody was welcome. So the kids that were awkward, the kids that couldn't relate to others, everybody and everybody on the spectrum and the gamut was welcome there, and they excelled. So students that couldn't manage it or were chewed up and spat out of the state system, for example, they found a place in Trinity that welcomed them and got them through. And so that's the sort of environment that I find. Can I have another one? That Trinity and Christian schools in particular have, and that's why it's not hard for me. Is when I was doing my introduction last night, I was getting to the point of the importance of Christian schools, for instance, and I was going to relate it to gravity in terms of, I know it's there, I know the powers of it, but it's really hard to describe gravity. It's just something that it's innate in me. The importance of Christian schools and the importance of students to go along to something like that, because my wife has testimony from this environment, and my children, who are both there at Trinity as well, have testimony from that environment. And it's because everybody from the janitor to the school admin to the teachers and the principal are grounded in a similar faith. And so it doesn't matter where the child is, they know that they're going to get, you know, a similar basis of understanding and beliefs. And that's why I find Christian schooling is so important. So that comes back to the positive discrimination that Jesse was referring to, where you have the right to essentially discriminate against someone that applies for a job, to say, I'm sorry, but you don't meet our criteria of walking in the faith and living in the faith, and therefore we can not hire you. Or someone that was hired but then, as in this case, walked away from the Lord, for instance, you can say your employment here is terminated on account of that. And I think that that's important for schools and for all faith-based organisations to be able to maintain that.
Thanks. So, I guess as almost a comparison, I often think about, well, would you expect the Labor Party to employ people who don't share the same values and have volunteers who don't share the same values? And I think if the answer to that is no, then why wouldn't the same answer be that for faith-based organisations, including schools? And I've benefited from many conversations with Martin, with Ian across our other sort of Christian schools across the electorate, and I think one of the areas where people get stuck on in this debate, and I think they get stuck on incorrectly, that when we talk about faith education, it's not just about our religious education teachers, it's actually about the whole community. And it is as David actually said, it's about the janitors, it's about the gardeners, it's about the whole, it's about sharing those values right across that community. And for me, I think fundamentally, of course, I support employing and engaging staff and volunteers who share those values. And it would be very difficult for principals, I think in particular, to be able to, if you like, sell their school if a significant part of the foundations weren't actually there, that there were staff that perhaps didn't share those values, didn't practice that faith life. So for me, it's actually quite straightforward, and it's something that we'd actually expect in terms of the way we employ people through political organisations too.
For more than 160 years, Anglicare Sydney has been dedicated to serving our community, providing essential support to older Australians, families in crisis, and those struggling with housing and financial insecurity. As the housing crisis deepens and cost of living pressures intensify, financial hardship is affecting more people than ever. Parents are struggling to put food on the table, families are being forced from their homes due to rising rents, and those escaping domestic violence often have nowhere to turn as they start over. Hardship now touches a broad cross-section of society: working Australians, people on income support, retirees, pensioners, First Nations communities, and culturally and linguistically diverse families. For many, this is the first time they've ever needed help. With an election taking place in the midst of a cost of living crisis, we know that voters expect real solutions. So that's why we're asking every candidate a simple but critical question. If elected, what will you do to ease the cost of living pressures on individuals and families, especially those most at risk?
So I'm running as an independent, which means that I am connected with community and directly representing you. So in being out and about and speaking with people, one of the really key issues with cost of living has been housing affordability, and we've seen both the major parties put out policies in the last few weeks that will help with housing accessibility, with the 5%. The 5%. Thanks, guys. It's been a long day. The 5%. The 5% deposits for first home buyers and interest rate tax deductions and things from the coalition. So these are measures that will help make housing more accessible for some people who are able to come into housing. But both of those measures are putting money into housing, which will continue to increase housing prices and make housing less affordable. And it is already just out of reach for so many people. And being out and about talking with people, there's a lot of older people who are personally in a very comfortable position, but have so much care and concern for younger generations. And it's been really moving, the compassion across the generations. And what I hear from people right across Bean is a desire for politicians and politics to get in and look at tax reform in the housing space. So looking at negative gearing, looking at capital gains tax, and not to just get rid of them and, you know, drop the value out of housing overnight. We know older Australians need the family asset to kind of trade for the aged care of their choice. People have invested in housing. That's how things have been set up. You know, you can't just drop the value out, but that we absolutely must look at the tax mechanisms over time in a staged way with, you know, grandfathered investments, etc., whatever that might look like. But that's the exploration about how we can change housing from how it has become such an investment vehicle to being, first of all, a safe and secure home for people. As an independent, I'm able to raise that from the crossbench because that's what I'm hearing from community really directly. That's what I think housing affordability is a really key part of cost of living. People are spending so much money on their mortgage or on rent. And again, these policies are just applying to people looking to get into the housing market. There's not much out there for rental policy either. So people, I think it also comes back to family. When you're so stretched and both parents are having to work so hard to just keep a house over everyone's heads, it puts a lot of stress on families. And we heard last night how beautifully Christian schools are looking after kids with really high rates of anxiety, which is, it's our kids, like they shouldn't be feeling like that. So housing is a really big part. We've also had recommendations from peak bodies about raising Commonwealth rent assistance, raising job seeker, raising youth allowance, and again, another way of looking after our young people who have got a lot of pressure on them already. I mean, I know I nerd out a little bit about tax reform, but outside of the housing space, you know, if we do rely heavily on income tax, and we've got an ageing population, and so this cohort here who are already struggling with housing, already struggling with cost of living, an ageing population that we want to look after well and with dignity in their older age, but a smaller cohort able to pay tax on that. We must look at other sources of revenue. We need to look at tax reform in a broader sense as well. So that's what I hear a lot from people. Electrification of homes is another thing. So people who can afford to electrify their homes have gotten batteries, solar panels, all of those things, and people who can't afford it are still paying really high bills. There's a big upfront cost to electrify, and how we can support people to make that change is good for climate action, and it's also good for bills and affordability. So helping renters, helping people on lower incomes to electrify. So there's a range of things we could be doing.
Thanks. Look, on housing, the Albanese government has probably engaged on some of the most comprehensive housing reform in the last 10 years. We had a decade where effectively we couldn't bring state and territory and federal housing ministers together. So there's an extraordinary array of work with the Housing Australia Future Fund, and whether that be through the build to rent, help to buy schemes, and so and they are critical issues, because at the end of the day, and one of the things we discussed last night was that effectively the right to shelter is a human right. So, and actually making that accessible is incredibly important, and that's something we're still focused on. But I guess one of the issues that's driven me through most of my public life has been about ensuring that families actually have enough to live on. And by that, what I mean is that they're paid fairly in the work that they do. One of the real foundation pieces of, I guess, the social contract in the early days of Federation was a decision called the Harvester Judgment, which led to our whole system of conciliation and arbitration. And the whole basis of the Harvester decision was actually that basically it's set as a foundation of our industrial relations law that effectively fair pay should be set at a rate which supports a family. And for about 80 to 90 years, of our industrial relations system. That held as the basic tenet of our industrial relations system is that we need to ensure that everyone across our community has access to fair standards at work, because that's how you can support a family. And that was based on one parent in a family, not necessarily two parents in a family. And so a key part of the work of the Albanese government has been to work particularly with some of our most vulnerable working cohorts who couldn't afford to necessarily live in the suburbs that they were working in, was ensuring that we lifted up their pay, that we took an approach to minimum wages, which is lifting up wages right across the country. This is absolutely critical if we want to get socially just outcomes across our economy. Look, there's work in terms of cost of living relief, in terms of ensuring that we keep working at reducing inflation, and putting downward pressure on interest rates. Those things are still fundamental in terms of easing cost of living. But one of the foundations is ensuring that families get paid for the work that they do, an amount that can cover their cost of living expenses.
Thank you, Jane. So a really good example of this cost of living is that I've knocked on, as I said before, in my defence of cats, 3,400 homes, and the number one issue that I'm hearing across Bean is cost of living. So even though these are state and nationwide questions, cost of living is definitely felt down here in Bean. And you don't have to go any further past the number of $50,000 that the average family with a mortgage is worse off in the last 3 years under this Albanese government. And I'm a family man with a mortgage, and it's true. Like, I'm Exhibit A when it comes to that. So there's a number of ways and reasons that we've come to that, and that's 11 interest rate hikes in a row. It's insurance that's gone up by 30-odd%. It's education up by 12%. Groceries up by a similar 12%. And everybody here knows that when they go to the checkout at Woolworths or gets the click and collect receipt, as we do, and you see how much money that is just going out the door for what cost almost half as much only a few years ago. And my church out at Vision does a Thursday night, so they're probably meeting right now, soup kitchen. I volunteered for that a few years ago with an idea of trying to stay on, but my 3 kids mean that I wasn't able to do that, and that I was required for bedtime duties at home. However, back about 3 or 4 years ago, there was more volunteers than attendees. I was quite shocked when Andrew Baker, who some of you might know, our pastor, said that they regularly get over 200 people coming in for soup every Thursday night. Now, they are taking bread rolls home, they're taking soup to go, they're taking stuff home because they can't simply afford it. And I don't know there's a church, the caravan park that's across the road that we assist with in that church quite heavily. But I don't know who else is coming in there. And there could be people there that years ago shuddered at the thought of going to a soup kitchen. In fact, we had to change the name from soup kitchen to community meals because of the stigma that had. And there are people that formerly wouldn't have gone to something like that who now have to. So the coalition have a number of policies from day one to start reducing that impost on families. And it's fuel excise from day one. It's 25 cents off a litre. And that will have flow-on effects right through the transportation network of this country. Everything moves by truck, and that will all reduce. Now, I put an ad out on Facebook this week, which had 350 comments. 3 were positive. 350 were, dare I say, I won't say Labor, but some Green advocates just having a go at me and using every word under the sun about this very issue. So that's the fuel excise from day one. There's a low and medium income tax rebate in the next financial year tax return, which is $1,200 back in your pocket, as well as our, what I think is, obviously I'm biased, but superior housing affordability promises, which deal with supply and demand. And there's 5 points, and I'm going to see if I can remember them all. Reduce 10 seconds. All right. Okay, I'll be quick. Reduce migration, so it reduces the demand. No foreign ownership for 2 years. $5 billion to work with councils to open up sewerage and council works and open up more land. Tax deductions for first homeowner buyers up to $11,000 per year for the first 5 years, and access to your super in order to get more young people off the rental market into the housing market. Thank you.
Australia is in the middle of a gambling epidemic. The figures show Australians lose per capita more than any other country in the world, a staggering $31.5 billion. In this cost of living election, it's salient to know that families are losing more to gambling than they're spending on their utility bills. More than 2 years ago, the Murphy Parliamentary Inquiry delivered a report to the government recommending, amongst other things, a full ban on gambling. It concludes that polls show evidence of so will you, gambling in the federal election, commend support implementation of all 31 recommendations of the Murphy? We believe it's incredibly important to protect our kids, protect our community from gambling harm.
So this is a pretty easy one for me, of course. So gambling is a scourge on our society. It's something that I don't believe necessarily should be outlawed in and of itself, because people should still have free will to gamble if they so choose. But that's where there is a positive sense of government regulation in terms of bringing in certain boundaries and certain laws in order to regulate that. So my understanding of the Murphy Law is that it pertains mostly to online gambling, and that's something that, to me, again, I'm not swayed by gambling. I could probably count on two hands how much I've gambled in my life. I'm not interested in it, but I know for some people it's an incredibly addictive and horrible way that people can waste away their entire life savings and that of their family as well. So you don't have to look any further than the issues going on with the Hellenic Club at the moment, where, I should have said an unnamed club in Canberra, where a large club in Canberra is currently dealing with something that I'm sure other clubs have most likely had to deal with as well, where a man that gambled close hundreds of thousands of dollars committed suicide because he said that the club didn't put in restrictions to what he could gamble away. Now, I'm surprised that in this day and age that doesn't exist, but to me it's simple, that more regulation in this regard in order to restrict how much people can take out from an ATM when they're in a club, whether it's how much they can gamble, how long they can gamble for, or whether it's online. There has to be regulations, because this is the sort of thing that pulls families and parents apart. So it's a simple one for me, and I absolutely agree with these recommendations.
This is one that almost universally, well, I think universally, being out in Bean, people want it to be passed, and it's one of the examples that there's a lot of really good people inside the parties working really hard on really good things, and this was a real example where we saw that the Labor Party was captured by industry in backing away from this legislation, and it has been a really key disappointment in the community with Labor on this issue. Of course, I would support these. It's a strong theme coming through. It's a necessary thing to do. It causes so much harm. It's a really easy one. Yeah.
Thanks. Look, first of all, the reality of legislation through Parliament is that it takes time, and it takes time working through conversations with all parties across the Parliament. But fundamentally, I support the implementation of the recommendations of the Murphy Review, and that's how I would work in caucus in the 48th Parliament if I was elected.
Thank you. Please thank our candidates. What we might do, we will break out, we will use the Slido to ask direct questions to our candidates. That'll come to Leslie, and we'll be taking the questions on the field. But before we do that, how about coffee, tea, and donuts and biggies at the back. Please mix and mingle. Yeah.
There are some which are kind of, which like, well, you're blah, blah, blah. It's like, yes, no. There are some which are like, no, these have been good. But
Is Slido helping you consolidate?
consult, yeah, it can. So you can actually access it on your
The questions have been coming. Thank you very much for those of you who have scanned and sending in your questions. We'll get underway. Just make sure our candidates are adequately caffeinated and ready to go. Ready to go. I should have said thank you to Martin and the school for letting us use their venue. Thank you, Martin, wherever you are. Okay, so we've got some questions come through. So let's perhaps start with David. David Lamerton. How do you reconcile your party's views on reduced immigration and health cuts with Jesus' teaching on helping the poor and the vulnerable?
Okay, thank you, Anonymous, for that question. So, yeah, those are all anonymous. So, the reduced immigration is simply bringing the immigration levels back into line with what we believe that we as a country can manage. So, we talked about housing affordability before, but at the end of the day, you know, we're a medium-sized country with limited resources, and it's one of the factors that are pushing a lot of young people out of the housing market is the number of immigrants that we're bringing in. So we still have, and I know that a follow-up question might be around, well, what are the visa classes and things that you're bringing or targeting, or Peter Dutton would be targeting, but the humanitarian visa intake will remain at, now I used to work with this number when I was in Home Affairs, but it was around 17,000 back then. I believe it's down to about 14,000, which I believe Labor's got. But whatever that is, I believe that's still to be taken forward. So I would argue that commensurate with many other Western countries, and there are a lot of questions that are asked of Australia when it comes to immigration that just simply aren't asked of other countries around the world. And if they're truly seeking asylum, then there are other countries like, for example, Japan, that basically has a zero immigration per year. And I like Australia is a finite country with a finite number of resources. So I think we do what we can when it comes to that number. And I like the fact that we do have a humanitarian intake, and we're a very multicultural and rich society for it.
Thank you, David. Now, the next question, you can sit down. The next question goes to all three candidates who are here. Where do you stand on puberty blockers and hormones and surgery treatment for children and teenagers? I think this question pertains to gender fluidity and transition. Who would like to go first? David, would you like to go first?
Well, firstly, this is a really complex area, and I won't pretend to be an expert in understanding properly some of the science behind it. But I think legally there are very important issues around consent, and particularly for children and teenagers, and the role of parental consent in relation to decisions here. And obviously at times this has ended up in a number of court proceedings in terms of at times when judges have had to become involved in because, I mean, obviously you don't want to get into a situation where often you may not have parents on the same page, and so how do you determine consent for minors? I think it's as I said, I think it's a very challenging issue, and whilst I know that it's mainly an issue for state and territory, I can understand why there's a significant concern about some of these issues.
Jesse.
So this is one that I have heard from people, and I can see that there's 11 people that have upticked it or however it works. So, and I do hear the concern from people about the implications of transgender treatment. It's a really tricky one there's a lot of nuance to it, and there's a lot of complexity, and there's real people and real families grappling with it, and it's a tricky one to speak on a microphone to a whole bunch of people about it. I guess in principle, we do need more research in this space to support families as they do try to navigate the best outcome for their child in the circumstances. And like David says, it is a state and local issue, but there will be federal levers about it as well. Fundamentally, we might not agree on all of these things together, and that's just a true thing that, we're never all going to agree on everything. I do support trans people to be in the fullest integration and expression of themselves in a supported and healthy way. And I know that there has been research that comes out of the UK, I'm not talking about the last legislation, but research, the Cass review, looking at more nuance. And I guess what I'd like to say is that it is a hard conversation to have together, because nobody wants to be hurtful and everybody wants to support kids in the best way possible. And it's navigating a way through of what is the best way. And I would like to just be really open to that conversation with you and to come and talk to me about your concerns. And I know it comes from a place of compassion for kids and trying to do the right thing. And I hear from parents who are also trying to do the right thing with their children as well. So, yeah.
There's also parental coercion happening in this space.
And I guess that's the nuance in the conversation, that it's not just a black or white one way or another with any of it. And that's where it is really important, and I guess really important to me as a community independent, because this whole thing works by us being in connection together, and that means being able to have really difficult and tricky conversations together with a spirit of compassion and generosity. And that's something that I would really like to foster together, because they are complex issues and we want to do the right thing, not be hurtful, and people do come from very different perspectives on these things. I said I do support trans people being supported. Totally, and for future fertility and all of those things, absolutely aware of all of that. I know.
And it has to be considered
it does.
very seriously.
It does. I agree with you. I totally agree with you. It has lifelong implications. Yep.
I won't take up too much of your time. To me, this is not a nuanced issue. It's not a scientific question. It's child abuse.
Another question directed to David Smith. We've got 3 David Smith questions. Okay, you're popular. Do Labor really support religious freedom to uphold the right of Christian schools to be selective in the employment of staff and the enrollment of students?
To be fair, I think that was my personal position. I made it very clear that that's my position, because that was the way the question was framed, is what the candidates themselves supported, and that's the position I would take into caucus and to any conversations in this space.
Is there a clarification required for that? Okay. All right, so the ACT is about to introduce legislation to force health professionals to act against their conscience. Do you support this? Jesse, would you like to go first? I'm guessing this has been asked by someone from the medical profession.
I'm not 100% sure what legislation that is, if someone wants to clarify. Yeah.
Would you support that?
No. People, of course, have the right to conscientiously object. Yeah, absolutely.
David?
Supporting to eliminate their employment if they say no to something. I guess it depends on how fundamental whatever that thing is to their employment. And I guess it comes back to your question about employing Christian people in Christian schools. It's a similar principle, right?
Look, as a principle, of course, I wouldn't support legislation to force people to act against their conscience. But I think it's really difficult to comment much on legislation that I've got to admit I'm not aware of, or what the actual detail of that legislation is.
As a principle, I would say that of course I'm against this. It comes down to some precedents that have been set in the past, that if the question's probably talking about matters of, say, abortion or assisted dying or suicide, I should say. And to me, if you don't get the answer you want out of, say, a conscientious objecting doctor, then there are probably other doctors that were more than happy to fulfil your needs in that regard. So I don't see that you need to deliberately target a certain doctor that might not agree with your beliefs and try to destroy their career and their family because of an agenda you're trying to push, when you can get the same health, in inverted commas, outcome from another person or another doctor. Agreed.
Thank you. Another question for David. Are Labor going to distance themselves from the Greens' agenda to remove protections for Christian schools from the Sex Discrimination Act?
So there are a number of agendas that we distance ourselves from, and look, as I said earlier, and the Prime Minister's made this clear, we're not. The Labor Party in government isn't going to erode the rights, and so certainly we won't be looking at removing those protections.
Thank you. Jesse, what is your position on whether Christian organizations can deny employment to trans people who do not fit the values of the said organization?
It goes to the very first conversation about the legislation and where that sits with that. So I'm not sure where the legislation fits with that. And it's that positive discrimination to be able to employ who you want. So it's where that law fits. It's a hypothetical, and I don't know the legislation in detail.
David again. Even if you fight for freedom of religion, will that make any difference when you are in a party with people who strongly fight against it?
The great story of the Labor Party is that we've been around since Federation, and in fact beforehand. And one of the things we've learned to have is have many robust discussions when we need to within caucus. But when you have a Prime Minister who comes from a position where he values the foundation of values that he got from faith education, I think you might know where the strength of feeling is on this matter.
The next question goes, okay, all right, it's just been bumped up. Where do you stand on cutting 41,000 APS positions in the ACT? I suppose this question is directed at David Laverty.
So we all know where Labor and their good friends at the Canberra Times stand on this question. If you can find me where Opposition Leader Peter Dutton has used the word cuts in regards to the public service, I would be pleased to hear your thoughts on that. He has said repeatedly that it is a reduction. Senator Hume, the Opposition Public Service Minister, has also said that, and Opposition Treasurer Angus Taylor has also said that. So the number of the 41,000 is in direct relation to the number of positions that have been employed in the last 3 years. I don't know about you, but I don't feel that the services of the public service have necessarily improved dramatically with those 41,000 people. In addition, those numbers were brought in during COVID, and they for a specific purpose, and then they just stayed on. We have one of the biggest, I think we have the biggest public service to population ratios in the entire Western world, and we are simply bringing it back into alignment with many other countries. Most importantly, though, is that Labor wants to talk about 41,000 public servants that might get an early retirement or might retire themselves. 34,000 public servants have left the public service nationwide under this term of government already. So there's most of that 41,000. But what they don't want to talk about is the 30,000 small businesses. I spoke to my coffee shop owner of choice, Cafe mocker there at Erindale, great, flat white, and he said, don't call them small businesses, call them family-run businesses, because that's what they are. There's savings that go into into these businesses. A lot of the security is caught up in their mortgages at their homes. And 30,000, that is a record number of family-owned businesses have gone out of business under this term of government. I don't see David Smith talking to anybody in the pre-poll line about small businesses.
David Smith, would you like to?
I didn't realise you were watching, David, but look, I'm old enough to remember when 30,000 jobs were cut in the late 90s by the Howard government over 3 years. They were cut across the country. But the impact that they had on this city has sent us into recession for 3 to 4 years. The damage was extraordinary, including right across our private sector, not just our public sector. But what we're talking about here are 41,000 jobs here in Canberra. It's on a completely different scale. 41,000 people who have families. No, it's 41,000 public servant roles to be reduced or cut. I don't care which word is used. They're pretty much the same. Pretty much the same meaning. The impact here is going to be devastating. It's going to be devastating, not just in terms of the economic impact of removing those wages from the economy and the flow on to the private sector here, which will be devastating, but it'll be devastating in relation to the extraordinary services that those Australians deliver that have an effect not just here in Canberra but right around the country. And whether that be in relation to DVA, whether that be in relation to Services Australia, I know that there have been suggestions that somehow those jobs won't be cut or reduced, but there is no way that you can't reduce those jobs if you want to achieve the 41,000 numbers. Now, one thing that hasn't been said by Peter Dutton in any sense is whether those 41,000 jobs would be replaced by labour hire or contractors potentially in the way the Abbott government did. That has not been said at all, because it's suggested that they'll all be harvested for basic budget benefits. So it's going to have an existential effect on this community. It's probably the thing that's keeping me up at night most nights.
Jesse, would you like to add anything to that? Would you like to sit out of that one?
Just very briefly, just to reiterate that it will affect the cafes in Erindale, it will affect everyone if we did cut 41,000 positions here in the ACT. And I guess part of it also is just to say, yes, it affects all of us. We're an integrated community together, which is a really special thing. But secondly, to just really give respect to our public service and the work that they do. Of course, there are efficiencies that can be made. That's without doubt. But our public service does provide really important services, quality controls. They do agricultural innovation, prediction, all kinds of amazing things, quarantine, border security, nurses and midwives. So yeah, I just would like to give respect to our public service as well.
Maybe you may remain standing for the next question. You might go first. What is your position on nuclear and gas electricity generation compared to the 80% renewable generation target?
So the current nuclear plan that the Coalition has put up, we've been told by many experts, doesn't have legs in terms of cost or timing. I wouldn't close the door on nuclear completely down the track with innovation and further development. Just this last week, someone was letting me know that in China there was a thorium reactor that was refilled while still running, which apparently is a big deal in nuclear world. So things are being developed all the time. But here in Australia at the moment, where things are, we've got a lot going for us in terms of renewables. And, in a related sense, to go back to tax reform, at the moment we give away a lot of our natural resources and gas without taxing it properly, without getting petroleum resources rent tax, which is something that we should absolutely be looking at as a nation. And other nations do it differently and have a lot more revenue to invest in their country, which we should be doing as well.
David?
Look, I'm not ideologically opposed to nuclear, but it just doesn't make sense in our energy mix, and it doesn't make sense in terms of cost, the time will take to actually get to working capability. It doesn't make sense in terms of the workforce development that we'll actually have to do. But I'm probably one of the only candidates who's actually represented nuclear scientists in one of my previous roles. I used to represent nuclear scientists at Lucas Heights. We've got a very limited capacity in that workforce. It just doesn't make sense, and all for a plan that pretty much will deliver 4% of base load. So for me, it's not an ideological opposition, but in terms of cost, time, workforce, it's not the answer for Australia.
Okay, thank you. David?
So I've got about 10 things to say about this. What's my time limit?
1 minute.
What? Oh.
1 minute and a half.
Okay, so I'm a fan of nuclear. So it's an investment unlike probably anything we've seen in this country since something like the Snowy Hydro system. It's something that the average lifespan of a nuclear reactor, a small modular nuclear reactor, not an RBMK nuclear reactor that might blow its top like at Chernobyl, is 90 years. Now, for 90 years, this one building can run at 90% of its capacity. Now, it will cost money. All big investments do cost money. It definitely will not cost $600 billion, as has been repeatedly lied to by Anthony Albanese. What we've got at the moment is a system where we dig up materials, we then ship them up to China to then be built into an unreliable power source to be brought back to Australia. After working some of the time, around 25% of the time, they are then buried in the ground for after 10 years. You cannot tell me that exporting our minerals to China, who we know will be invading Taiwan before 2049. They have told us that, and we are relying on them for our unreliable energy sources. This just does not make sense. It took a lot of guts for the Liberals to put forward a position like this, but this is an energy policy that will have its benefits into when my grandchildren, heaven, God willing, will be able to have a cup of tea using nuclear power into the next century. The Labor Party simply do not have an energy policy that is more than 10 years in front of them, and they put these, I'm not going to say radioactive, I'm going to say these toxic materials into the ground from these enormous windmills, and they want to talk to us about radioactive waste. It's a no-brainer for me. It costs a lot of money, but it is an investment in not our generation, not our kids' generation, but future generations as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So the next question goes to the heart of our Christian faith, and it's close to my heart. The Bible tells us that God knows us before we are formed in our mother's womb. Life is formed at conception in Christian belief. It's a question for each of you candidates. Do you support or oppose late-term abortions? David, would you like to go first?
I do not support late-term abortions. However, if there's a circumstance where a mother's life might be at risk, I think that has to come into the consideration.
So I'm a midwife, and obviously I love babies and I adore women. And I guess with a question like this, I just love to just take a breath and just remember the women and their babies that are part of this story when it does happen. Nobody likes abortion, but I guess as a healthcare worker, banning abortion doesn't stop abortion from happening. It just stops safe abortion from happening. In this situation for a late-term abortion, it's incredibly rare. There is usually, life-threatening circumstances. The baby has got illness or disability incompatible with life, and that conversation is had with the woman and her care team in terms of carrying the pregnancy to full term or whether that's going to be harmful. Nobody likes abortion, or when you say support, I guess it's support for access to abortion when it's needed. Yes, I do support that in an incredibly supported and compassionate way. Yes.
Can you tell us about the late-term abortions where babies are left to die, screaming for an hour? Even if the mother wants the baby back, she's not allowed to have it back. These things are happening. They put the baby in a petri dish, the baby screams to death, the nurses can't stand the crying, sometimes they put it in a cupboard. These things are happening. They're happening all the time. And there was recently a whole thing about it with Senator Canavan and another senator, and you're probably aware of that. This is a very serious issue, and it's very cruel to the babies, and late-term abortions are absolutely appalling. And if the mum wants to keep her baby, and it's a viable baby, which a lot of them are, why can't she keep the baby? Why can't the baby get proper medical treatment as any newborn would if it was, you know,
Born alive, yeah.
born, you know, healthy, but early? This is what I want to know.
Yep, so having worked as a midwife here in the ACT for 12 years, I have never heard of or seen such a thing happen. I've held, you know, babies that are stillborn, too early to live. I've held those babies as they have passed away over time, together with the families. I've never heard or seen of that happening in the ACT.
It's been happening in Queensland for a long time, and it's been happening in other states.
I know, and I have asked about failed abortions here in the ACT, and it's an awful situation, and from my understanding, failed abortions do not happen here in the ACT. It's very, very ensured that that won't happen, which is an awful thing to be even talking about, but yeah. And what you're describing is obviously horrific, and if it's not a wanted abortion, it doesn't make any sense, yeah, that the mother wouldn't get to have her baby and care for her baby and give palliative care if needed, etc. Yeah.
So if you haven't seen the movie, I strongly recommend buying it or renting it, but it's called Unplanned, if anyone here has seen this. And it's the story of a woman in the US who had an abortion and then went on to work at the Planned Parenthood clinic. And she was locking up late one night, and she went in to look at the I don't want to talk about this. She went in to look at the files of herself and the baby that she didn't have, and that broke me. So no, I don't agree with late-term abortions. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. I suppose this question goes to all three. What are your policies regarding those seeking asylum in Australia? How much is this a priority for you? Jesse, would you like to go first?
So I personally have worked with refugee groups since I was in my early 20s. When I was studying journalism in Bathurst, I helped the local nuns, who were fierce and wonderful women, to help resettle Iraqi and Afghani refugees in Bathurst and in the region. I've worked on the Thai-Burma border with the Karen Women's Organisation, doing amazing programs inside the refugee camps and then inside Burma in the war zone. Totally committed, you know, like David was saying before, our humanitarian intake. We're a signatory to the International Refugee Convention, and just that obligation to help people who are fleeing persecution and war, and, you know, can be religious persecution as well. So, yeah.
David?
So I worked in Home Affairs for a number of years, and I worked on the offshore processing network, so the Manus and Nauru, Manus Island and Nauru. So I have more first-hand experience in this regard than a lot of people, and I was at the forefront of the Medivac bill, if anybody remembers that, also known as the Phelps bill, where the decision was taken out of government's hands that two doctors could choose that a refugee or transitory person could come to Australia for urgent medical care. Now we worked 12-hour days for a number of weeks and got pilloried in the media every day, but it was in many cases it was the lies told against us as public servants and as the border force was quite extraordinary. There's a lot that people think they know about offshore processing, and they think that they know about this system, but in many cases, most people, in my experience, don't have a clue. So there is a system, as we've already talked about, through humanitarian intake. As I said before, we've got a number commensurate with many other Western countries around the world, a percentage, sorry, and there are other countries that simply look on by. Now, the problem with that is that in this cases, so seeking asylum, so the seeking asylum happens through these cases. It happens through this intake, but it also happens through UNHCR, who have a number of camps and refugee camps across the world. If someone tries to seek to come here and circumvent our borders and our border force in order to enter our country illegally, then you're essentially jumping the queue. And to me, that is seeking asylum, but that's also breaking Australian immigration law.
Thank you. David.
So I guess most of us would see ourselves as wanting to be good neighbours and see that as possibly as a foundation of our faith. And part of the responsibility of good neighbours is to, at times, is to open your home to others, particularly those who are most vulnerable. And so I'm proud to be part of a government that's increased the humanitarian intake, that work to provide pathways to permanent citizenship for thousands of effectively Australians who are on temporary protection visas. But we have a particular responsibility to parts of the world where we're part of the parts of the conflicts that have led to people losing their homes, led to losing their safety, not necessarily through any of our actions, but through the actions of other parties. One of the great sadnesses of my time as a federal member have been the failings in terms of many of the Afghan people who worked with our defence forces, the failure to get them out in 2022 when Kabul fell. And the truth is, we do need to have rigorous processes and checking processes. This is not an easy space, but fundamentally the foundation for me in this space is that we should be good neighbours. I can tell you that I work particularly in relation to a group of a very small but distinct group of asylum seekers who come originally from Tibet. Now, if you're an asylum seeker from Tibet, you don't actually go through the UNHCR processes because if you were to do so, you may not make it actually safely out of Tibet. It's Tibet to Nepal to India. And so sometimes there are anomalies we have in our system that we need to actually work through to ensure that we're a compassionate world neighbour. And I was able to help get a particular program there reinstated.
Thank you. Jesse? You okay. This must be in the news. Do you support the Prime Minister's recent criticism of some Christians working on Peter Dutton's campaign? I suppose this relates to Jesse and David. Can someone explain a little bit more on that question?
The exclusive brethren, the Christian brethren working?
The exclusive brethren have been working for there's been reports of the exclusive brethren working for the Liberal Party in different areas, particularly the one that I've heard of is the Newcastle area.
Is the issue because they usually don't vote?
They don't vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have a conscientious objection to
Gotcha.
voting, but they're working for the Liberal Party, is the report that I've read. I didn't ask this question, I've got nothing to do with the question, I'm just...
Giving background, yeah.
So do you support the Prime Minister's recent criticism of some Christians working on Peter Dutton's campaign?
So look, my understanding of this is it's not about actually criticising Christians, it's actually been about the behaviour of some people on the campaigns. And look, one of the great things about the campaign for Bean has been that it's been a very civil and sociable campaign, but that's not the same as some of the campaigns across the country, and obviously things can get quite passionate, but my understanding is the criticism was about potential harassment and intimidatory behaviour by particular peoples. I understand they were associated with a particular Christian church, but it's not actually about the fact that they were Christians, it's actually about the particular behaviour alleged.
Thank you.
My understanding of the question and partly where it came from was that the Labor MP in that seat was going up to them and asking what their religion was. And that's where the umbrage comes from. And, you know, I don't think it's appropriate for a candidate or an MP to ask such a question.
Okay. Do you think that the ownership of property by non-citizens is contributing to higher property prices, and do you support non-citizens owning property in Australia? Jesse, would you like to go first?
So with housing, it's a particular passion of mine because it just has such an impact for people, and we do need to put all of the things on the table, and supply is one of the things, demand obviously, and we've got issues with shortage in construction workforce, we've got issues with construction materials, prices have gone up a lot, and of course, you know, looking at who's owning properties and where that investment is coming from needs to be on the table and looked at as part of that bigger solution as well. Of course, that's a necessary part.
So are you saying 41,000 construction jobs
can become available if people aren't owning them from overseas? Is there a connection? Oh, I get you with the... Sorry, I'm a bit slow tonight. Good one.
David?
Look, this is an area where there's actually quite heavily regulated already. But I think the concern is often that there are ways where people are getting around loopholes in terms of who's really owning property or not. But it's actually something where there are pretty foreign investors needing approval from the ATO in this space, and there's a temporary ban on foreign purchases of established dwellings. So I think overall, it's overstated, but there are concerns about where third parties are often used to get around whether it's foreign ownership or not.
David?
Yeah, so an anecdote from my brother-in-law in Sydney was he was looking for an apartment in Waverton, if you know Waverton, and I said, you're far too close to the city there, Russell, but he said, I'm adamant that I can buy one. And he said, I'm just looking for houses with the number 4 or 14. And you could probably assume why. And I said, that's craziness. And he, sure enough, because they were literally the only properties that he could afford that were of a similar type and proximity to the city. And sure enough, he ended up buying an apartment 14. So to me, it's when we've got the housing crisis that we've got at the moment and foreign money coming in to have them as investments or to lay empty even just for large parts of the year. To me, we've got to, as a government, we've got to put our own citizens and our own residents first, and that's a simple one for me, that yes, that they should be restricting that foreign ownership.
Thank you. Thank you. David Smith, this question goes to you. Your party blocks a review into gender reassignment treatment time and again. Why?
To be honest, I'm not aware of this being a subject of conversation in caucus at all. Who's bringing up this review? Does anyone know where the review's coming from? Oh, it's in the Senate. I'm in the House of Reps. That's probably why. So often, lots of strange and interesting things come from the Senate, and we in the House of Reps tend to prefer to initiate most legislation reviews. Look, to be honest, it's not something that's been much of an open topic of conversation in caucus.
Okay. If there is another pandemic, do you support mandating vaccines or risk of job loss if you choose not to? This is going back to vaccine passports and the lot. David, would you like to go first?
So the last pandemic was a 1 in 100 year pandemic, and so unless I am successful and very successful and serve for 100 years, it's probably not going to happen. However, bird flu is brewing. So absolutely not. I think we saw that time and again in COVID-19, and there's a lot of laws that were made up on the fly by a lot of state governments and some state governors premiers that were thought themselves pretty big. So I think that obviously you shouldn't be losing your job over a vaccine mandate. It should be something that you can be reassigned to a different role. Given, is it a COVID vaccine? That craziness. Yeah. I was visiting someone at the hospital only recently, and they still had a 2-person limit in fast track. It's just, it's unbelievable. I can't believe that we're still doing this. 100%. Yeah. Yep. Yep. So I had a friend that moved up to become a principal in Bundaberg, and when this rule came in, there was when it came into effect, he lost a third of his staff. Now I don't know where you find more teachers in Bundaberg to fill those positions. So it's a look. Obviously, the risk and the threat of COVID at the time, we really didn't know what it would look like. So to a degree, we live life forwards and remember history backwards. But so I give them a little bit of grace. But when it comes to something like this, I don't think anyone should lose their job over something like that, and that they can be reassigned if it's possible. Yep.
Thank you. Jessie?
As someone who was working in healthcare on the front lines when COVID happened, a lot of people were reassigned where they could be. Absolutely, that was a priority. And I was on international calls with health system in Italy, where you guys will remember at the beginning of COVID, there was people dying every day in Italy, and it was just a horrendous situation. So there was a lot of learning on the fly. I think if another pandemic came, we've learned a lot from this last one, and we would do things very differently. Next week there's the Australian College of Midwives oration, and one of our midwifery leaders is actually talking about her reflections of our time in COVID and trying to navigate a way through, which I'm really looking forward to. It was a wild time, and we've learned a lot. There are mandates for things like in aged care and where there are people with vulnerabilities, and I think that's fair. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you that there's certainly areas where absolutely people should make the choice themselves, and there are areas where you're working with vulnerable populations where it makes sense. So yeah.
David?
I can't really add much to that other than I hope that we do have the Centre for Disease Control in Canberra rather than outside of Canberra. And I think it's important to listen to expert voices, but understand there are times where there are balances of rights and responsibilities, and we have a responsibility to vulnerable populations too, but the way we can actually exercise that and understand people's concerns here are to see where we can provide alternative employment.
And informed choice, I think, is a really big part of it too, right?
Sorry, is there a question, follow-up question at the back?
No, I think that was, got you.
Okay, so what support will you give to young women who want to keep their babies and be supported in places like the Carina House?
Can I go as the person who spoke about abortion before? So this is the thing about supporting women's choice and actually supporting them properly. So I think many of you would know also about the service that's available in Queanbeyan that supports not all young mums, supports mums who want to keep their babies as well. So we do have really beautiful supports in this region. Carina House are amazing, and we do need to absolutely support. And I think part of the bigger picture of looking at housing in terms of vulnerability, bringing down cost of living, making it, for people to feel that it's more of a possibility to be able to keep their baby, that's part of those bigger things as well, and the pressures that people are feeling. So.
Yeah, so this is a pretty easy one for me, and the agency or the organisation that Jessie just referred to as First Steps Pregnancy Support, which my wife is a co-founder of. So, and if you haven't heard about it, please do come and speak to me afterwards, because they take the approach from a medical and social worker perspective to say that there's women that come in with these issues, and it could be a financial issue, it could be a health issue, it could be a capacity issue, or even pressure from loved ones, be it a parent or a boyfriend or something like that. So they come at it from both approaches to say that we will provide all medical support that you need free of charge, and will provide all social work support that you need free of charge. And in many cases, not only do they just need a shoulder to cry on and someone to talk to, but it's a trained social worker like my wife who can tell them what they're actually eligible for and give them the support that they need. And that's why they've been so successful, and they have so many wonderful testimonies already of people that and I could tell you some of them afterwards if you're interested, but they're really quite amazing. They're moving into another area, which is accommodation, because they can provide everything in the world in the building, but if these vulnerable women are going back to places or homes where they feel pressured, or to even a DV situation, then it's simply it's one side of the coin sort of, but the other's not. So they're moving into this more I hate the word holistic, but more holistic situation where they can then get where they can then have that wraparound support around the accommodation, where they just simply need to be in a different space in order to go to term under that they want. So if you know anybody who's interested in building a couple of apartments out in Queanbeyan, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
We're probably almost on a unity ticket here, and Carinya House has a great story over more than a quarter of a century, and I think whatever we can do to work with both local and federal governments to support organisations like Carinya, who do such amazing work to provide safe shelter and support to those young mothers and expectant mothers, it's part of why we're all running, I think.
Thank you. The next question is about homeschooling. What do you know about homeschooling families, and how can the government provide support for home educating families commonly on a single income?
I can take this one. So who's the lady that I spoke to at halftime? No. She's gone. Okay, great. I had a great conversation at the coffee break. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I would have probably had a bit of a different opinion about this. But once you go through and you walk with people who have lived this experience, I have changed I wouldn't say I've changed my opinion, but it's furthered my perspective on this. So we have good friends where they have 4 children. I'd say 3 or 4 of them are probably on the spectrum, and school is just simply not an option for them. So they really don't have a choice but to homeschool. And so the mother is doing that, and the father works at a nearby school. But she's a qualified, capable woman who has basically gone from probably $100,000 a year career to more or less nothing in order to parent 4 children, parent and teach 4 children. To me, it seems like if she is there and as a family are saving the state for places at a school, it seems pretty appropriate to me that she's given some sort of reimbursement or some sort of stipend in order to help that, whether it's resources or an income for her, or even just support with the utilities because the power's on all day. But the second thing I'll say to that is that what the lady that I was speaking to said is that the US approach around identifying family income as a whole, so that in her case she's homeschooling, but her husband, who's on a fairly good wage, is in one of the higher tax brackets, so they get slammed by the tax man, whereas collectively though they would probably, it's a lot more reasonable. So I hadn't considered that up until about 40 minutes ago. I think it's an interesting concept and something that I might look into a bit further, but I'm not identifying or suggesting any coalition tax reform here.
Thank you. David, would you like to go next?
I guess, one of the things you realise raising a family with children who you think are all going to be from the same, are all going to be the same as each other is you learn pretty quickly that they're not, that they respond to different environments, and I think even through my children, their own education journeys. That's pretty interesting. And I think what we need to do is provide a whole range of frameworks that accommodate all those different learning journeys. And homeschooling's one. And obviously, it still has to be within a strong regulatory framework. But there's some really interesting other ideas that are emerging about how we tap into the lessons from distance learning and how we might actually use that more in a home learning environment to try and mitigate some of the costs. But there obviously is a significant time and cost consequence for a parent or guardian who's responsible in that space. And I think it's a great conversation to have.
Thank you, Jesse.
Just very quickly, I wasn't part of the conversation in the lunch break and this is the tea break, and this is not something that's come up for me, so it's something I would want to look into.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the great thing about hearing people's experiences.
While we are there, I just wanted to say we are 15 minutes away from finishing up. There are a bunch of other questions which we haven't gotten through, but they're mostly related to the ones that we have discussed. The next one goes to everyone. Do you support paying down government debt? I suppose you're in government, David. You'd go first.
Yes, I do. And look, it's one of the first jobs we had coming into government, and it's why I guess we took a fairly modest approach to expenditure and were able to deliver a couple of surpluses in our first couple of years of government.
David?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And when people ask me why am I doing this and why am I trying to get into politics, it's because I'm fearful of my three kids and the way and the world that they're going to inherit from us. So housing affordability is obviously one of them, but are we just kicking the can down the road and racking up more and more debt that they're going to have to deal with in 20 or 30 years' time? So absolutely, we need to reduce debt.
Just very quickly, because it is getting on. So it is one of the things that I do hear from a number of people, that our national debt is a concern to people in our community. It goes back to our tax reform. The way things are right now, Labor has delivered 2 surpluses, but that is, you have to cut things to be able to deliver a surplus, and we're hearing a great shortage of different services and needs that people have, for example, with Medicare. So I think, again, it goes back to tax reform and other sources of revenue so that we can look at paying down that debt as well.
Thank you, Jesse. I think the next one goes to you.
Oh, yes, I was wanting to answer this one. I saw it down the thing. I was like, what do I answer?
Why are you calling yourself an independent when she's funded by Climate 200?
Yes. So it's a question I'm getting a lot. So Climate 200 did give us some funding at the beginning of the campaign, $34,000 to just get going with T-shirts and corfletes and things. Other than that, we're just completely getting donations coming in from community. I'm making phone calls most days to say thank you. I'm woefully behind because there's genuinely money coming in every day from people in our community keen for change. They did give us another $20,000 recently, so all up $54,000, which is less than half of what people from community have been donating towards the campaign. And just to say that Climate 200, they back independent candidates to try and even up the playing field a little bit for the party war chest that people have for campaigns. And they have 3 things that they ask candidates to commit to, which are all things I'm already committed to myself anyway, which is action on climate, gender equity and integrity in government, which I think probably we could all agree are important things.
We've got 3 final questions and we'll try to get to them within a minute each. Would you consider tax reform by way of family tax-free threshold, where a single family could benefit from both adults' tax-free thresholds? It's a very particular question that relates to families. David?
I think I essentially answered that before, in that I think it's an interesting concept I wasn't aware of, and in the circumstance that we talked about before in terms of and it's not just homeschooling, but it could be someone that's a full-time carer. This seems to be a very logical approach and something worth investigating. Yep.
Jesse? Yes. David?
Look, I think I'd have to have a pretty strong conversation with Jim Chalmers first.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. There is one final question. Let's go to the euthanasia one. What is your view on euthanasia? Do you support it or not? Given palliative care medication is so good these days and people can die naturally and peacefully. David, would you like to go first?
So this is again a pretty, it's not nuanced for me. So I do not support euthanasia, as I call it, voluntary assisted dying or assisted suicide. So there's a number of reasons for this. So first of all, there's statistics that have come out about, and I can't remember if it was nursing or GP practicing at university, but palliative care used to be a 2-week component of the course. It's now been reduced down to 2 hours. And the problem with that is that because resources are being pushed from places like Clare Holland House, they're being pushed into VAD. And to me, that is horrendous. I went to the two final things. I spoke to the Disability Expo today, and there was one company there that provided palliative in-home support for a broad range of people, and the ACT government, with 2 weeks' notice, cut their funding for under 65 people that were in palliative care to die peacefully at home. So in the words of the director there, the babies and children were essentially having to die in hospital, and with 2 weeks' notice, the ACT government, without any explanation, cut that funding. That to me is just extraordinary, and it's a no-brainer that a child, that is taking their last breath wants to be at home in their own bed. So to me, that's quite straightforward. The other issue with VAD is that we don't know where it's going, and as I said earlier on, we don't have to look far across the ditch, left or right, to see where some of these approaches and some of these things that are dressed up as certain aspects can then morph into others. And there are circumstances in Europe, in countries such as Holland and Belgium, where a teenager can seek VAD because they have autism. Now, that's, to me, it goes a long way from, say, who's the guy that did the Enough Rope with Andrew Denton, who's obviously a big advocate for VAD because he's nursed his ailing father for a very long time through this process. So at one end you've got that opinion, but right at the other you've got the precedent that could be coming through. And to me, it's not a road that we should be going down. And I think as we have to fund palliative care. Yes, I know that there's ways that we can help people, but if we're just diverting resources into VAD and pressuring people to just go down that approach because it's cheaper and simpler, that to me is not what a society is about and what we, and most definitely I, do not stand for.
Thank you. Jessie?
I totally agree that we need to remain fully invested in palliative care and giving beautiful palliative care, which we do have here in the ACT, and I'm really shocked that it's obviously ACT government level funding, just to be clear as well, but from a federal level would absolutely be pushing for full funding for palliative care. I do support voluntary assisted dying for people who do want access to that care and dignity in dying. I totally agree also that we do need to keep, and I think ACT government is being very mindful of this, but it is something that we do all need to keep an eye on, where the checks and balances are, where the edges of that are, and keep having that conversation together, because we don't want it to just go down slippery slopes and go where it yep.
What's your age limit?
Age limit?
And the ACT is currently considering amendments to that
I
to
think.
include 14-year-olds, people with Down syndrome as well.
What, really?
14-year-olds up. It was part of the community.
And the ACT government, I haven't heard of that. I would need to look into that. Yeah.
What would your age limit be? Because you support VAD, so what would your age limit be?
I guess at this, I would like to learn more, but I guess at this stage it would need to be an adult with a fully informed consent and fully informed decision by an adult person. But I'm open to learning more. Yeah.
David?
Well, I remember part of this debate, obviously, in the federal parliament with the previously if you like, the Andrews block on territories considering voluntary assisted dying, and I'll be honest in that I supported that legislation to go through the parliament to to allow the legislative assemblies of both the ACT and Northern Territory, if that's what they chose, to consider such legislation. But when I spoke about it, I made it very clear that I had serious reservations about voluntary assisted dying and about the importance of the guardrails that need to be in place to ensure that we don't end up in some sort of slippery slope situation. And I think that's something where we should still be quite conscious and careful about how these schemes actually work in practice, and where necessary hold people and governments to account.
Thank you very much.
I think I just said that I have serious reservations about voluntary assisted dying, so I don't actually support voluntary assisted dying.
Okay.
I have heard that one particular child was very depressed, and that was the reason why they allowed the child to end her life, or they assisted her to end her life. And I think that's very sad, because depression doesn't have to last the whole life. It can be a period of time that is limited, and once they get over it, they've got a whole life ahead of them. And I think this is a real tragedy for that child.
This is a case in Europe, presumably?
I don't know where, America, Europe, but it
Okay.
did occur, yes.
Right. That's a comment. Yeah, that's a comment. It's a legitimate comment. So, okay, so please, if there's no further questions, let's give our candidates a good hand. This is they've been a good sport. Thank you very much. I should say these are probably the hardest votes you've worked for, so there you go. So let's finish the night with the Lord's Prayer, and just follow along if you know, for most of us. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom, the glory, and the power. Amen. Thank you. Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for joining us, and have a good night.